Before we start, in case you already saw the video, it is important to mention that this is a re-uploaded version because the original module looks like damaged during the shipping. I noticed this on the engraving, which was not really sharp, so the Atezr was very professional in this case, so they asked me even to send back the original module so they can investigate exactly the problem. And in the meantime, they sent me back, and this is actually the stronger version. This is 36 watt module. In the original video, maybe I will mention several times that it is 24 watts because only the second part of the video will be new when I'm doing the engraving and test cutting. Now back to the original video. Hello, welcome to my tech farm. In this video I will test Atezr L2. This is the second generation laser engraver and I have it in the three strength 12, 24 and 36 watts, and I think this is the middle one, the 24 watt version. And it is able to engrave up to 54,000 millimeters per minute speed. The engraving area is 410 by 410 millimeters, and two more interesting specifications: it has autofocus on Z-axis and screen for offline engraving. Now about the safety. Laser engravers are tools like, I don't know, welding machine, which requires a safety equipment. The main is the safety glasses, which should be included in the box, but also use it in a good ventilated room, and if you are using regularly the engraver, then you should build some enclosure. Actually, you can buy the enclosure from the Atezr website. I think it is approximately $160 or something like that, and of course never leave the engraver without attention. Now the Atezr asked me to keep the unboxing and the introduction part below 3 minutes, so I have to speed it up because the main part should be presenting its engraving and cutting capabilities. So let's see what's in the box. Now I know they asked me to skip this part, but I have to mention very important things. I noticed they use the closed timing belts. With this, the stepper motors can be static, not on the moving parts. For example, X stepper motor is here static, not on the moving module, and the Y-axis stepper motor is again static here, so it is not on the moving X gantry. And for the linear motion, on Y-axis they use the linear rods and bearings, and I can see the diameter is approximately 10 millimeters, and on X-axis they use the linear rails. So with this, the mannequin is very promising and they can really be able to engrave on those higher speeds. On Z-axis there is some knob for adjusting the focus, but also on the back side I can see a stepper motor, and with this properly it can go down until the switch is pressed, which is on the module. And this is that laser module. Here I can see maybe some LEDs or something like that, and then there is some kind of switch, maybe like a BL touch or something like that. So properly it goes down, and when it's pressed it knows that it is triggered and set the focus automatically. Max input of the laser module is 24 volts and 3.5 amperes. The AC adapter has the output of 24 volts and 5 amperes, and it will go into the engraver. And here we have the output to the pump, and the input for the pump is DC 12 volts. And with this we can enable or disable the pump over the software. For example, with the engraving you want to disable the air assist pump, and for the cutting definitely you want to enable that air. And another new thing I noticed with this engraver, there is no slot for the SD card, but we have the USB slot and the USB drive. Now maybe there is a small space for improvement because they use only one Y-axis stepper motor, and the torque will be transmitted with this 5mm diameter shaft to the other side. But maybe it would be a much nicer solution if they would have a 2 Y-axis stepper motor, because this is only 5mm and it is a little bit flexible. Probably it will do the job, but a definitely nicer solution would be using 2 Y-axis stepper motors. Assembling of the frame is smooth and without problems, and it is actually a good design. 4 bolts in each corner will keep this frame squared. Setting the belt tension with this screw on the back side. Inserting the shaft from the hole in the side and connecting with the couplers. So far the assembly was very smooth, but I have to mention this because I think this needs a better solution. I inserted the shaft and now I have to tie this coupler. And these two carriages, to be parallel with each other, I have to move them in the edge position here. But now in this case I cannot access to these bolts. If I move it a little bit higher, then they will not be parallel. So definitely I will suggest that they use 2 Y-axis stepper motors. In that case we don't need this shaft, and the coupling and assembling would be much smoother. My solution will be probably to loose this side here, tie the other screw, and then when they are in edge position I will tie the other side too, but it's a little bit hard to access with these Allen keys here because I cannot use them in the stronger position like so. The next was inserting the X gantry. First I have to remove this cover to access to those holes, and just 2 bolts from each side will hold it in a position. Next step, inserting the laser module, then connecting the cables and the air assist pipe, and doing some minimal cable management. I can see that it wobbles a lot in this direction, and then I noticed these bolts on the back side are loose and this even shared, so I have to find a replacement for this bolt here. So definitely check yours, are these tight on the back side. Now actually I find what is the problem. When I completely tie down this bolt and I measure how much it stands out, the distance is approximately 3.3 millimeters, but the thickness of this plate is 3 millimeters, so it cannot completely tie it down. The solution for this is very easy. Just use a shorter bolt. You can probably buy in your local store M3 by, I don't know, 5 millimeter countersunk bolts, or I will grind 1 millimeter from these existing ones and I will reuse them. These are very small bolts, and pay attention, don't hold them with your hand, but create some kind of holder. In my case I just a plate and a nut from the other side. And now I can tie them completely down. One more thing I have to fix before I start with engraving. Top of this rod is loose, it's moving, and they are held by bolts on both sides, so I have to remove this cover, tie that bolt and place it back. We can take off this cover by removing these 3 bolts from the back side. I'm using Allen key from both sides to tie these 2 bolts, and then I'm placing back the cover and it should be ready. And it is time to start the test engraving and cutting, and these are the regular test materials I'm using in this kind of videos: plywood, MDF wood, stainless steel, some black acrylic, anodized aluminum and similar. I'm connecting the engraver with my laptop using the provided USB cable, and let's go through the settings on the touchscreen, turning off the touch sound. I will use both the Lightburn and the laser GABL for testing, mostly the Lightburn because I can have different line strength in one operation, and then I will do the laser GABL testing, but in both cases we have to create some custom buttons. In console, going to macros, right click, and then we can enter some commands. For example, the autofocus button, I have to enter here the ESP500 in the brackets. Okay, and with this button I can initial the autofocusing. And the switch triggered, so the focus is set on the top of this surface. If it has a spherical or cylindrical object which cannot be pressed with this switch, in that case you can do it manually using this fixed focus block. The thickness is 8 millimeters. Framing on this laser cross is very easy, similar to that toothpick method I presented a few weeks ago. Let's say I want to create a square exactly on these lines. So I will do the framing on this cross. And then I have to move right 50 millimeters to do the engraving. And for this I created this macro button. And when I click it, it will move right 50 millimeters. And now I can do the engraving. And exactly on the spot. But don't forget the engraving area is a little bit reduced with this offset distance. I noticed the laser cross on this new replacement module is rotated, which I will fix later in this video. And I'm starting with the test engraving on this plywood. This is speed up 4 times, but on screen you will always see the used settings. And this time really nice and sharp engraving from 1000 to 6000 millimeters per minute speed, 60 and 100% power. And I think I will engrave my logo on these settings, 4000 millimeters per minute speed and 60% power. Now moving to the laser GLBL, I want to engrave this logo, but here also I want to create some custom buttons. I already have one. The commands you can enter here, for example M8 enable the pump, and M9 to disable it, but you can create a custom buttons here. But also you need the custom buttons for the autofocusing and for that positioning on that laser cross. And similar to a test engraving, this engraving is very sharp and nice thanks to this linear motion system, which is really good, absolutely no waves, and the lines are really straight. And now I will engrave some grayscale image, and I did some experimenting here, and I think I will choose the 50K speed and 80% power, but the position is very important because I can see a lot of lines here, but I think this area is quite clean on this plywood, so I'll try to engrave here that grayscale image. This is a time-lapse video. Footage is speeded up 25 times. Wow, this was engraved in 2 minutes and 15 seconds, and I remember the time not so long time ago that I needed 10 minutes for this. And I can see maybe it's a little bit even darker, so I could go even with the higher speed or reduce the power a little bit. And it is time to start with the cutting, and this is 3mm thick plywood, and I will do some test cutting here, but I will use the air assist in this case. Oh, my mistake, I forgot to plug the pipe to the module. At least you will have a direct comparison, cutting with air and without air assist. And now in the software I forgot to enable the air assist, so I get same results. Let's give it a third try, maybe here. Now this positioning laser will be very useful because I want to engrave here, and I have to be very precise, very small area. Let's do the framing. Okay, and now let's move the offset of that laser. And I can start with the cutting. So the first line was cutting with the air, and the cutting capabilities is similar, 200 millimeters per minute full power. It was cutting out, but look how sharp edges we got here compared to these two, and also on the cutting out part it is much sharper and cleaner compared to these. And I have another documentation card for the archiving. And still cutting the plywood. This is 6mm thick. Just one click to autofocus and it will set the Z distance. This is really nice and sharp cutting on 300 millimeters per minute speed, full power, and cutting out parts are also very clean. Don't forget I use the air assist here. And on 400 millimeters per minute speed, I can see in X direction it is much stronger compared to the Y, because it is cutting out through completely, but in Y direction nothing at all. This is 3mm thick MDF wood, which is very hard for cutting for some weaker laser engravers. And I will use the same settings like with that 6mm plywood. Interesting, only on 200 millimeters per minute the part was cutting out completely, but if I watch the other side, I can see huge difference between X and Y axis direction. In X direction it was cutting out even on 500 millimeters per minute speed. On Y direction nothing visible even on 300 millimeters per minute. And I can even see a nice gap on X direction, but in Y direction nothing. This wood is thick 20 millimeters, and I will try to cut it in this direction and then I will break it to see the penetration of the one pass. And don't forget I will do it only in X direction because it's stronger. Wow, this is the first time I can cut this in one pass, but don't forget this was in X direction, in this direction it is stronger. Let's try in Y direction, I'm very curious. Same settings, but this time in Y direction. Almost. And this was cutting in Y direction, only this last maybe 1 millimeter in the center, in the middle, was not cut in one pass. Strength is very good. This is 3mm thick black acrylic, and usually the settings are very similar to that MDF cutting. On this black acrylic it is very hard to see the laser spot during the framing, so this positioning laser cross is extremely useful. There was some kind of protection foil on this I forgot to remove. Well, anyway, the cutting was successful on 2 and 300 mm per minute speed, full power. On 400 mm per minute, again the same story. In X direction it is completely cut. Maybe you can see the gap on the screen too. But in Y direction, well, almost this is the other side. But anyway, what is cutting out, I have very nice and sharp edges there. And now I'm engraving on a stainless steel, and with these stronger lasers I'm using 200 mm per minute speed, full power, which is actually too slow, but I want to feel how deep is this engraving, and later I will show you that actual engraving can be done on bigger speeds too, but in that case it is not so deep. And this is the previous engraving with the old laser, which is replaced actually, so I will engrave here some similar text. And here I will set the focus manually using this 8 mm distancer, and in the conclusions I will explain you why. Well, the engraving is here. Let's clean it with isopropyl alcohol. And definitely it is much stronger compared to this one, which actually the previous module was damaged at 22 watts or 24. Now, as I mentioned, we don't really need always this deep engraving into stainless steel. We can do it much faster, and if we want just a marked surface like this spot here, but it is not so deep like this. It will be engraved here after number 36. 2000 mm per minute, full power. And this is also permanent engraving. And now I'm engraving anodized aluminum. These tags are from the Chulbaka company, and I really like to work with aluminum because it will not burn, it doesn't smell, and actually what we do are engrave removing those top layer, and that's why we can get this nice engraving graphics. These are speeds, and as you can see it is not sensitive to stripe settings. And for the end I want to test the offline engraving. As you can see, the USB cable is unplugged. I prepare here engraving of my logo, and I will save it to the provided USB drive. File, quick save. Framing to check the position of the graphic, and then start engraving. And this is the final result, basically the same like with the online engraving, only in this case I don't have to plug it to the computer. It is time for some fixings, and I already mentioned that I started to use manual focusing, and there are two reasons. One, it is faster. Manual focusing I can set in few seconds, until the automatic requires 25 seconds until the module goes completely up and down, and this is speed up video. The other is that it stopped with the working. First I wasn't sure what is the problem. I even tried different stepper, and actually the reason was very simple. The knob on the top stuck to the surface, but I cannot move it higher because that lead screw is too short. So I cut down 1 mm on the lathe machine from that knob, and so the set screw is now closer to the edge, and now I have nice gap between the knob and the surface. Second fixing is rotating the positioning laser cross. First I have to remove the holder from the module. There are two screws from the both sides. Then I have to take out the laser holder, and this set screw was already loose, so I rotated the laser into correct position, and then I fixed it with this set screw and placing the cover back to the laser module. And don't forget to recalibrate the position of the cross on the screen. And it's finished. And now conclusions, and I really have a mixed feeling about this engraver. First of all, it has great linear motion system, and with this we can engrave on those higher speeds without any vibrations. Those lines will be really straight, circles really round and similar. And this is one of the quietest engravers in this category of 30 watts. And what is big plus for me, that the fan turns off when the module is not operating. But it sounds obvious, but that's not the case with a lot of engravers. It has other unique solutions too. This touchscreen is great and it is really able to work in offline mode without connection with the laptop, and I can do it without SD card because I can use the USB drive, which is also a very unique solution, and it is much more comfortable for the file transfer. The positioning red cross is extremely useful, especially with those darker surfaces where it is hard to see the laser spot during the framing or boundary check. Maybe you saw my video with the toothpick method, but this is much more nicer and elegant solution. Now, I had some problems actually. You saw most of them are around the module holder, and I could fix them, so they are not big problems for me, but I informed Atezr about these problems and they promised me that they will fix all this in mass production, because don't forget I got this unit much earlier because I was waiting for the replacement module for this video. About the power of this laser, I noticed that for thinner material, 7mm, plywood, MDF and similar, I have to go with a little bit lower speeds compared to the other 30-watt diode lasers. No big difference, but yes, the speed was a little bit lower. But I noticed that it can cut better, deeper materials. This was first time I could cut that 20mm wood in one pass, in X and almost in the Y direction too. So I believe they play a little bit with those 6 diodes inside, you know, maybe they didn't focus exactly on one spot, but they try to prolong that focus, and with this it has power even deeper in the material. Once I experienced this because one of manufacturer offers 2 different modules. One is for the engraving and the other is for the cutting, especially with these features. This air assist also works great, and together with this air assist nozzle it will result really sharp, nice cuttings with the wood. Don't forget, use air assist only with the cutting of the wood, but not with the engraving. I try to cover all things I experienced with this Atezr L2 engraver. If you have some other experience, you know, write me a few lines in the comment section. Thank you for watching and happy and safe engraving!